Every one of us, when imagining how humans appeared, remembers that same picture of evolution. If someone asked you to describe it in the first few seconds, you would probably say a transition from ape to Homo sapiens, which in Latin means wise human. The rise from the weakest hominin into the king of the food chain. And on one side, you would be right. However, on the other side, you are stepping into a major mistake. The problem is that we imagine evolution as something linear. We think everything happened gradually, and that we, Homo sapiens, were somehow born with the right to become civilization. But as you will see later in this episode, alongside our line, there were dozens of other human species that were stronger, sharper, and faster than us. The goal of this episode is to understand which species lived alongside us and became part of the history of Homo sapiens.
You are watching the first civilization. Let's begin.
The first one is an early hominin, Australopithecus afarensis. It appeared around 3.6 million years ago in East Africa. That is 1.5 million years before Homo habilis. The main transition from hominins toward the human ancestor was standing on two legs and changing the skeleton. The opening at the base of the skull, where the spinal cord passes through, shifted so the head could stay balanced above the spine. The pelvis became shorter and wider so it could hold the internal organs and stabilize the body while walking, and the foot gradually lost its grasping function. Now the big toe stopped being a separate grasping toe and became part of the support system. But the most important thing is this: the hands became free. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the precision of movement, finger sensitivity, and hand coordination improved so they could pick fruit, carry food, and hold objects. This was not yet a tool in the way we understand it, but it was already the foundation for one. We will return to that in a minute. However, here we need to remove one illusion. First, this did not happen in 1 year or 1 decade. For evolution, that is like 1/10 of a second for us. But for the body, it required millions of years of populations, random variations, and successful genetic combinations. Second, this did not happen because an ape suddenly decided to stand up. It happened because the climate of East Africa changed. The forest was no longer continuous. The environment became more mosaic. Some food remained above, in the trees, while some food now had to be found on the ground. And in that situation, the organism began to adapt. And already against this background, around 2.4 million years ago, the first species of our ancestral line appears: Homo habilis, the handy man. By this point, walking on two legs was already an old foundation of the line. The special feature of Homo habilis was that he could use sharp stone flakes to cut meat, process plant food, and gain access to scavenged remains. That is why scientists placed him in the early classification of the genus Homo. To us, he would still look small and archaic, with long arms and ape-like traits. But inside him, a new system was already appearing. The body walks on the ground, the hand works with an object, the brain holds the action, and the stone becomes an extension of the organism. But the most important thing, the brain grows to roughly 500 to 700 cubic centimeters, compared with many Australopithecines at around 400 to 500. Compared with our brain, around 1,300 to 1,400 cubic centimeters, this seems small. But for the evolution of an animal, this is already another level of memory, coordination, and repeatable action. And we should not forget biology. A bigger brain requires more energy, which means more food. As a result, the diet expands and gives access to more calorie-dense resources: meat, bone marrow, and dense plant foods. But for that, teeth are no longer enough. You need a tool. And this is where the transition begins to the next species, the one that will turn humans from a local creature into a wanderer of the larger world. The next one is Homo erectus, the upright man. He appears around 1.9 million years ago in Africa and then leaves it. His remains are found not only in Africa, but also in Georgia, China, Indonesia, and other regions of Eurasia. And the proportions of the body change radically. The arms become shorter, the legs become longer. Height enters a range of roughly 1.4 to 1.8 meters, and weight around 40 to 65 kilograms. Long legs made walking more energy efficient because Homo erectus no longer lived only in a small forest zone, but in wider landscapes. Food and water were at a distance. He had to walk longer, remember routes, and return to the group. Because of this, the brain grows. In early forms, it could be around 600 to 800 cubic centimeters. In later forms, it approached 900 to 1,000 and sometimes even more. But again, the brain requires energy. So the quality of food changes. Meat, bone marrow, and more calorie-dense plant resources. Cut marks on animal bones show that Homo erectus, or closely related early Homo, gained access to the carcasses of large animals. But the most important legacy is tools. At first, these were simple Oldowan tools, choppers, flakes, stones for breaking bones. But around 1.7 to 1.5 million years ago, the Acheulean technology appears, large bifacial hand axes and cleavers. And let's be honest, to make a tool like that, you need to try. If today it seems easy to make a weapon or a tool, go into the forest and try to make something similar. Then move yourself 2 million years into the past and do it with their brains, because I would not be able to do it. But now we move to the people of the Middle Pleistocene, the transition from Homo erectus to the main lines, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens. Meet Homo heidelbergensis. These people appear around 700 to 600,000 years ago. If Homo erectus gave humans a large body and the exit from Africa, then Middle Pleistocene humans add a new level of organization. Average height could be around 1.6 to 1.75 meters, body mass around 60 to 80 kilograms. Brain volume is often estimated at roughly 1,100 to 1,300 cubic centimeters. This is already close to the range of modern humans and Neanderthals. But here is what is most interesting. Fire also becomes an important part of this zone. With Homo erectus, fire was earlier and more debated, but by the Middle Pleistocene, the traces of fire become more confident. And from here comes the main turning point. The descendants of Homo erectus were already widely dispersed. Some groups remained in Africa, others moved into Europe and Asia. In Europe, cold and large prey shaped the Neanderthals. In Africa, a more changing environment and connections between populations led toward Homo sapiens. In Asia, other archaic lines formed, which we later connect with Denisovans and close forms like Homo longi. Neanderthals are usually associated with the period from roughly 400,000 to 40,000 years ago, although some early forms go deeper. They are found across Europe and Western Asia, from Spain and France to Germany and the Altai. This was not a small local group, but a broad human line that lived for hundreds of thousands of years near glaciers, forest steppe zones, caves, large herbivores, and predators. On average, they were shorter than modern humans, around 160 to 165 centimeters, but significantly more powerful. Short limbs, a wide chest, a massive pelvis, dense bones, strong arms and legs. This body shape retains heat better because a compact body loses less energy in a cold environment. But here, we need to be careful. This is a separate human form, not the direct ancestor of Homo sapiens. Their diet was built around large prey, but it was not only meat. They hunted horses, deer, bison, reindeer, wild goats, and sometimes mammoths and rhinos. But analysis of sights and teeth shows that they also used plants, nuts, roots, starchy foods, and in some regions, marine resources. Technologically, Neanderthals were advanced. They used the levallois technique, where the stone is prepared in advance so the final strike removes a flake of the needed shape. Later, they are associated with the Mousterian industry, scrapers for processing hides, points, knives, awls, tools for wood and bone. This is no longer just a sharp stone, but a toolkit for different tasks: hunting, hide processing, clothing, and everyday survival. Fire was part of Neanderthal life. Many sites show traces of hearths, burned bones, heated stone, and processed food. There is evidence that early Neanderthals or humans close to them in Britain may have intentionally produced fire around 400,000 years ago. We cannot assume every group knew how to make fire, but some probably did. We will return to the meeting between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens in 2 minutes. However, parallel to Neanderthals, another human line existed in Asia, the Denisovans. If Neanderthals were the European form of the human of cold, Then Denisovans were the Asian branch, about which we knew almost nothing for a long time. They were discovered not from a full skeleton and not from a skull, but from DNA. In 2008, in Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains, a small finger bone was found. In 2010, analysis showed that it belonged not to Homo sapiens and not to a Neanderthal, but to an unknown human line. That is why Denisovans are often called ghost humans. For a long time, science did not have their full body, only bone fragments, teeth, part of a jaw, and traces in the genomes of living people. But this was enough to understand the main thing. Denisovans were close relatives of Neanderthals, but a separate Asian line. Judging by DNA, they may have lived across a huge territory, from Siberia and Tibet to Southeast Asia, New Guinea, and Oceania. One of the most important details is their contribution to the adaptation of modern people. Tibetans have a variant of the EPAS1 gene connected with life at high altitude and low oxygen levels. It is believed that this adaptation came from Denisovans. That means Homo sapiens did not always create the needed solutions by himself. Sometimes he received them from other human species that had already lived in those conditions before. Denisovans also interbred with Homo sapiens, but we will return to that in 30 seconds. Parallel to the European Neanderthal line and the Asian Denisovan line, our own line forms in East Africa, Homo sapiens. The earliest finds are dated to roughly 300,000 years ago, but this does not mean that a fully modern human appeared in one moment. Rather, different populations existed in Africa, gradually developing the traits of our species: a more rounded skull, a higher forehead, a reduced face, a chin, a lighter skeleton, and a brain averaging around 1,300 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. The main difference of Homo sapiens was not brain size. Neanderthals could have had larger brains. What mattered more was the organization of the body and behavior. Sapiens was less massive, with lighter bones, longer limbs, and greater plasticity. Africa at that time was not one stable environment, but a system of savannas, forests, rivers, coastlines, and constantly changing climate. So our line did not form as a narrow adaptation to one place, but as a species that had to quickly change food, routes, tools, and ways of interacting inside the group. Technologically, Homo sapiens continued to use stone tools, but gradually the individual tool became less important than the accumulation of culture. More diverse points appear, along with bone and antler working, pigments, ornaments, shells, long-distance exchange of materials, and signs of symbolic thinking. This means that humans begin to survive not only with the body, but with information. Genes need thousands of generations to change an organism. Culture sometimes needs one successful idea that can be shown, repeated, and passed on. Around 70 to 60,000 years ago, part of Homo sapiens begins to actively leave Africa, although earlier exits also happened. Around 45,000 years ago, our ancestors enter Europe, where Neanderthals had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, and in Asia, they meet Denisovan lines. This was not an exit into an empty world, but a collision of different human systems. Homo sapiens was not automatically the better species, but his combination of a lighter body, large brain, language, symbols, social bonds, technology, and migratory flexibility turned out to be more stable. And while Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans occupied large territories on the island of Flores in Indonesia, there existed a completely different human form, Homo floresiensis. This is the most interesting species because it is often called the hobbit due to its height of around 1 meter and weight of 25 to 30 kilograms. The remains from Liang Bua Cave are dated to around 100 to 60,000 years ago, and stone tools on the island survive until around 50,000 years ago. This means these small island humans may have lived almost at the same time as Homo sapiens was already spreading through Southeast Asia. The main difference of Homo floresiensis was not only small height, but also a small brain, roughly 380 to 430 cubic centimeters. For comparison, that is smaller than Homo habilis and about 4 times smaller than ours. But here, we cannot conclude that they were simply primitive. Despite the small brain, they used stone tools, butchered animals, and probably hunted stegodons, dwarf elephants that also lived on Flores. The island also had giant rats, Komodo dragons, and large birds. It was an isolated ecosystem where all animals changed by their own rules. The reason for their size is most likely connected to island dwarfism. On a small island, resources are limited, territory is limited, and the predator system is different. In such conditions, large animals often become smaller because a small body requires less energy. So if the ancestor of Homo floresiensis was Homo erectus, or a close Asian form, then over hundreds of thousands of years of isolation, this line could have shrunk almost to the limit. The disappearance of Homo floresiensis overlaps in time with the appearance of Homo sapiens in the region. Although there is no direct proof of a meeting, maybe climate changes finished them off, but nobody knows for sure. So, if we put the system together, human evolution was not a straight road to Homo sapiens. Early hominins stood on two legs. Homo habilis connected the hand, the brain, and the stone. Homo erectus gave humans a larger body and the exit beyond Africa. And Middle Pleistocene humans became the transition zone where the main late lines split. Our African line, the European Neanderthals, and the Asian Denisovans. By the end of the Pleistocene, this multi-species human world disappears. Neanderthals vanish around 40,000 years ago, Denisovans disappear as a separate population, and Homo floresiensis fades from Flores around 60 to 50,000 years ago. Homo sapiens did not necessarily kill everyone directly with a spear. In some places, climate did the work. In others, isolation, small population size, competition, or interbreeding. Our ancestors mixed with Neanderthals and Denisovans, and part of those lines was not destroyed, but dissolved into us. That is the main point. They were not weaker, worse, or less human. Each of them was a separate version of human, created for its own environment, but nature does not preserve a form out of respect for its past. Homo sapiens remained not because he was chosen in advance, but because his combination of body, brain, language, social groups, technology, and interbreeding worked better in that moment. We are not the final version of nature. We are the last remaining branch after a world where there were many humans.
If you are interested in the history of the first humans, ancient civilizations, and how culture emerged from survival, subscribe to The First Civilization. Thank you.